Thank you, Dan. I'm not worthy. I appreciate that very much, and I appreciate all the work that all of you do in terms of being the advocates for something that clearly has so many accessory benefits beyond that immediacy of that primal pleasure of bicycling. John F. Kennedy said that nothing compares with the simple pleasure of a bike ride. It is a simple pleasure, but it has ramifications way beyond that. You look at the consequences of the USA Pro Cycling Challenge, and Sean Hunter's going to speak here in a few minutes, and I won't steal any of his thunder. I won't say any of the stuff about how it had $83.5 million of economic activity, or how it was broadcast in 161 countries, or how powerful it is as an example that Colorado could put on, the classiest world events, and that people might even look to Colorado putting on an Olympics, for example. I'm not going to say any of that. I am going to say that kind of an endeavor, and having it so broadly publicized, makes bicycling an intrinsic part of our identity, of our brand, as you would have it. And people begin thinking of Colorado and bicycles. And the key here is when you lay out the benefits of bicycling, obviously the health and the exercise that we get from it, but the reduction in traffic, the cleaning the air. When I went over to the climate change talks when I was still mayor in Copenhagen, and one of my staff very wisely weaseled an interview with the head of planning in Copenhagen. And he'd been in the planning department for 34 years. Right? So he was back there almost to the beginning, not quite the beginning. When they first started, everyone assumes that the Danes and the Dutch and all the Nordic countries always did all this bicycling. Well, they didn't. After World War II in the early 1950s, they didn't have any more bicyclists out commuting than we did. But it was a concerted effort of planning and implementation. They'd go in 3-year plans, and sometimes they would focus on new lanes and how they get more routes, so that it made it easier for bicyclists to get from one place to another. Other years they'd focus on safety. Other years they'd focus on training and etiquette. But the key was they had a long-term vision that bicycling was going to be a key part of their future. And when I got elected mayor, we started down that route, and when I went out to Copenhagen, I got to see the success. Copenhagen now is almost 40% of their commuting population every day goes in and out on bicycles, right? If you've been there and seen the weather in the late autumn and the winter and the early spring, it is cold and damp and sleety and severe, and yet still they have this very, very high proportion of bicycling commuters. We should be able to dwarf them, right? Long term, we should bury them in our tracks. Not that I'm terribly competitive, but to do that, you have to begin changing culture. And I think that today you're giving an award to our state patrol chief, Jim Wolfenbarger. And when I became mayor, we saw that the Denver police had a neutral, but even in their neutrality, a slightly negative approach to bicyclists, and that their bias was for automobiles rather than bicyclists. And certainly in terms of our planning, our Department of Planning in the city and our Department of Public Works, this is not news to most of you who've been doing this work for a long time. We needed to change that culture, right? And Bill Vidal, who filled in for me, after I became governor, he was the interim mayor. Before that, he was the deputy mayor and head of Public Works. And so he really focused. Denver was the only city that had a comprehensive transportation plan that looked on how do we get more choices, and how do we long-term begin planning today for construction projects and implementations that are just going to make it easier and easier for bicyclists to get from one part of the city to the other. And we changed the culture in the Department of Public Works, but also in the planning department. So we began looking at turn lanes, and some of the examples, whether it's in Copenhagen or Montreal, other places where they do give significant benefits to bicycle riders. what do we have to do to prepare culturally our community to be able to not only adapt, but begin requesting those kinds of innovations, right? So that you do make it easier for bicyclists. They are safer, and they are able to get places a little more rapidly. What Jim has been doing with the State Patrol, I mean, part of it is just making sure that the USA Pro Cycling Challenge, that we have a real partnership when we're doing events, but also part of it is changing the culture of our state troopers. So they recognize this is part of the brand of Colorado, and it's something that we are going to continue growing and continue increasing. And to do that, we need to change the culture of our state agencies. We have to change the culture of a lot of our businesses, so they are willing to invest and make sure that we have, whether it's bike sharing or making sure that there's enough, there's space for parking in skyscrapers, or large places of employment, not just downtown, but also in the tech center or up in Broomfield, wherever, that everyone is focusing on biking. In the Department of Transportation, you know, Don Hunt is someone we brought in. He was the CEO of a large consulting firm, BRW, had retired. He thought he was safe and happy, and we convinced him that he should come in and run CDOT for a few years. And you know, he's been looking at how do we begin implementing the state's law that bicyclists must be accommodated in every state transportation project, in every state transportation plan, which is a wonderful law, but it's meaningless if we don't implement it and make sure that we help our counties and our municipalities think in those terms and know that the Colorado Department of Transportation is their partner in this. That we'll try and help find planning monies and find resources if there's a nice bike route, but we're missing one bridge, one crucial element. We can't find a way around that. You know, where do we get that money? How do we figure that out? CDOT's been working on the Safe Routes to School program, so it's focusing on working with students and families in 500 schools in the state to make sure that, you know, kids not only learn how to ride safely and pay attention to road laws, but that they are also have pathways that are safe, right? So that this can be a healthy way, and to be healthy, it can't be dangerous. We have said, and we're now looking at how we're going to implement this, but one of the things Colorado can own, another part of our identity, if it's hand in glove with bicycling, is we want to be the healthiest state in America. Right? There's no reason why we're already the thinnest state. And I know it's not just because of me. Before somebody makes a crack that I skew the data by having me in the state. I keep trying to get my son to eat more. My son is the world's pickiest eater, so I keep saying, you're going to end up like me. He says, Daddy, I love you. I want to end up just like you. I said, no. That notion of being the healthiest state, you think about the ramifications of that, not only of all of us having healthier lives, you know, more uptime, less downtime. I mean, psychologically, people that are healthier are always more joyful. Study after study now demonstrates if you're around more happy people, you're happier. It becomes mutually reinforcing. You go down, there's a long list of benefits by really creating a culture of health, and I think bicycling is a crucial part of that. We recognize that the efficiency issues of how much energy you burn. Now, one of my staff, Alexander Price, did a little math in terms of you know, efficiencies. A person riding a bicycle at 15 miles per hour burns 0.049, so basically 0.05 calories per pound per minute. Right? So a 175-pound person burns about 550 calories in an hour, or about 34 calories per mile, or 21 calories per kilometer, for those of you who are precise. Now, 1 gallon of gasoline, which, you know, let's call it 4 liters, contains about 31,000 calories. Now, if a person could drink gasoline, then a person could ride about 912 miles on a gallon that a normal car only gets 30 miles. So just in terms of caloric output, one other, I mean, obviously, if we brand our state as the healthiest state in the country, if we are able to demonstrate that Colorado is the most pro-bicycling state, right? I mean, these competitions, which are, I think they're kind of a joke, right? The rankings in these magazines, you can take them way too far. But competition done properly, right, is healthy, right? And it is a good thing to have Fort Collins looking, looking at how they're doing in terms of their bicycle culture versus Colorado Springs or Pueblo. And just for the record, those kinds of identity branding for communities have a lot to do with their economic development. The last 15 years, 20 years, Fort Collins is rapidly catching up to Colorado Springs. Colorado Springs used to dwarf Fort Collins, but now Fort Collins has. And again, if you look at the differences between the two communities, it's hard to find the most glaring difference is Fort Collins has invested tens of millions of dollars in bike paths, bike trails, into improvements that help sustain their bicycling culture. And Colorado Springs really hasn't yet. Now there are other differences, and you can argue these points, but those differences, as we begin to look at that, Durango, another community that Fort Collins and Durango are doing great economically. They have low unemployment. They're doing better than most of the other parts of the state. Is it just coincidentally that they've also made the investments in hiking and bike paths and making sure that people have these other choices in terms of how to get from one place to another? I don't think it's all. I don't think it's all coincidence. And a big part, if we're going to have little competitions between the different counties and the different communities, which I think is not a bad thing, you guys all get to kind of fan those flames and get people thinking about it, begin to establish some criteria by which we would begin measuring the successful implementations to make biking easier from one community to another. And that's why one of the big reasons I've been such a fan of Bicycle Colorado right from the beginning, because ultimately, if you want to get laws passed, if you want to get businesses more involved, you do need advocates organized and with speaking about the same talking points, the same goals, that they're going to get to the same place. And we are all about trying to, again, support Bicycle Colorado as much as humanly possible to make sure that we get, a collective effort. People work together to achieve these goals. Last, I want to just take 1 minute and talk a little bit about, there's Ride the Rockies, which you guys have helped create and celebrate. We're going to, next September, 21st to 23rd, we're going to have something called Pedal the Plains. And when I campaigned for governor, I got out across the plains, and I've never felt so centered. And I'd sit and talk at the kitchen table of a rancher or a farmer and hear their stories and go hang out on a Tuesday afternoon after work when everyone's watching their kids play Little League Baseball. And to see where your food comes from and to experience the pace and just the solid groundedness of our Eastern Plains. I said, I can't imagine people wouldn't love that if they got the chance. So basically, we're going to do Pedal the Plains from the 21st, 22nd, 23rd of next September. It's going to be basically the Ride the Rockies for the rest of us, that maybe aren't quite so buff, but allow us to really begin looking at A, where does our food come from, and what is that sense of place? What is that part of Colorado that a lot of us don't experience, too often take for granted? And how do we create a context where you really can experience this? I expect we won't have a huge ride, maybe 500 or 1,000 people next year, maybe 1,500. Yeah, we can tell if you guys got to work. But I think, in Iowa, they have 10,000 people a year that go through on their RAGBRAI across the rolling hills of Iowa. And they do that in August when it's blazing hot and humid. I love Iowa. Don't misinterpret that. My competition does have limits. Anyway, I think the notion of having Pedal the Plains, of having a USA Pro Cycling Challenge, having a Ride the Rockies, each of these become another aspect of our commitment to bicycles, right, as a state and our citizens. It allows our businesses to connect, it allows our nonprofit communities to connect, and it allows not just state government, but our community government and our local municipal government to all find their place and say, how do we all get to working together on this? One of our country's greatest innovators, two of our country's greatest innovators were Orville and Wilbur Wright. They were operating, people forget this, back in Dayton, Ohio, when they were trying to figure out lift and the wing and how something might fly. They created their first heavier-than-air flyer, but it was a bike shop where all that innovation came from. Those guys were in the bike business, and that first airplane that they eventually flew at Kitty Hawk was made in a bike shop. So don't forget that for a moment. Thanks for all your work.